My name is Amanda. I'm 29 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm the second born in a pair of twins, arriving just 11 minutes after my sister Isabel. But to our parents, those 11 minutes were enough to crown her as the family's miracle, while I was just the shadow that followed. Since I was little, I've heard my mom proudly tell stories about Isabel's birth, how they waited so long to have children, how Isabel was a gift from God, a light in their darkest years. I, on the other hand, was born just minutes later, unexpected, almost unplanned. No one ever said it outright, but their eyes, the way they spoke of her with affection and offered me only a polite smile, told me everything I needed to know about my place. The difference was clear from kindergarten. In our first school play, I was Little Red Riding Hood in the starring role, and Isabel played a shrub on the side of the stage. But minutes before showtime, she started crying because she'd torn a corner of her costume. My parents rushed on stage to comfort her and missed my entire performance. Afterward, when I eagerly gave my mom a picture I'd drawn, she just patted my head and turned to praise Isabel for being brave enough to stand on stage even without much of a part. In elementary school, I poured myself into every test, always aiming for the top of the class. I joined the science club and did a solar energy project I was genuinely passionate about. When I brought home a first-place district medal, my dad glanced at it and asked Isabel if she had a good day at school. She said some kids teased her for wearing mismatched socks, and suddenly the whole conversation shifted to Isabel's emotional trauma. Still, I kept trying. In high school, I joined the debate team, competed statewide, and won the highest award in 10th grade. Isabel often skipped school because she felt overwhelmed by homework. Her grades were average at best, but my parents praised her artistic talent because she painted a few romantic watercolors and knew 3 guitar chords. I once told them I painted too and had sold artwork online, but they just smiled and said, "Don't compare yourself to your sister." What hurt the most wasn't the praise for Isabel. It was how they casually dismissed all my efforts. When I got accepted into the honors program, they said, "Amanda works too hard. She's going to burn out someday." Isabel got a C on her history test, and my mom comforted her. "A C is fine. Not everyone has to be good at everything." I was stunned into silence. One time, I won a scholarship to a Stanford summer program. My dad asked just one question: "Did Isabel get in too?" When I said no, he sighed in disappointment. I've lost count of how many nights I went to sleep with a hollow feeling, tears quietly soaking my pillow, wondering what I'd done wrong, when all I ever did was try to be a good daughter. As I got older, I saw more clearly that my role in the family wasn't to be loved, but to be the backdrop against which my sister could shine. I was expected to be understanding, to endure, to yield, because she's more sensitive than you. But who was ever gentle with me? I used to believe that if I was good enough, my parents would finally see me. But it turns out, there are invisible walls made of names, birth order, and misplaced expectations. Walls that no amount of effort could break through. I grew up in a house where love was distributed according to a scale I never had a chance to touch. And to this day, I still wonder, if I had been born those 11 minutes earlier, would everything have been different? I still remember that fateful Christmas Eve, cold, snowflakes drifting past the wooden window frames of our family home in Boise, Idaho. I had just finished my sophomore year of college with a near-perfect GPA. I didn't get the fanfare Isabel did when she debuted an abstract painting at a local gallery, but I still tried to keep a cheerful spirit as I came home for the holidays. That dinner, we all sat around the table with roast meat my mom had prepared. Everything seemed normal until my uncle, Richard, my dad's younger brother, raised his glass and chuckled as he brought up our birth story. Well, Tom and his wife were so shocked when the doctor said it was twins, they only planned to have one after all. I paused, knife in hand, mid-splice of a potato. I looked up and met his eyes. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice wavering. Uncle Richard looked a bit uncomfortable but kept smiling. "Oh, yeah. Isabel was planned and you were..." a little surprise. No one was prepared for two at once. The table fell silent. My mom gently touched his arm and quickly changed the subject, but I didn't hear a word after that. All I could hear was the echo in my head. Only planned for one. Isabel was the plan. Everything became crystal clear, like someone had flipped a switch and illuminated every memory from nearly 20 years in that house. I no longer needed to wonder why I always felt forgotten. The reason was so simple and so cruel, it made my chest tighten. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bed, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on my entire life. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I no longer craved my parents' approval. I no longer wanted to make anyone proud. Except myself. After the holiday, I returned to college with a completely different energy. I stopped calling my mom when I aced a programming test. I stopped sending pictures of awards. Instead, I channeled everything into building my skills. And more importantly, building a life for myself. I earned a full scholarship to the computer science program at the University of Washington. I studied hard and enrolled in extra courses, artificial intelligence, machine learning, system security. I was no longer living in Isabel's shadow. I was starting to create my own light. After graduation, I was recruited by a young tech startup in Seattle called Nurix Labs. No one in my family asked about my new job, but I wasn't hurt. I knew my worth, and that was enough. 3 years later, Nurix was thriving, valued at hundreds of millions after a successful Series C funding round. I went from software engineer to team lead, and eventually, at 27, was promoted to director of software development. In a tech magazine interview, I was called the Heart of Nurix. I printed the article and quietly pinned it on my office wall. Not as the older daughter, not with anyone's permission, just as me. I bought a small apartment downtown and decorated it myself with a minimalist touch. Simple, clean, full of freedom. Every morning, as I stood by the window and watched the city wake up, I knew I was living a life I chose. No one had paved the path. No one got to define me. Isabel still regularly updates social media with photos from gallery shows and tea parties with her artist friends. My parents still interact, share, and comment with pride. I don't feel resentment anymore. I just no longer feel the need to squeeze myself into a family portrait that only ever had one subject. Now, I've learned that some wounds never heal, but we can learn to live without letting them define us. I'm not a shadow, I am me. With scars, with achievements, with everything I've overcome. And I know the next chapter of my life is only just beginning. I've always believed that if anyone in the family truly saw me, it was my grandmother, Grandma June. She was the only one who never called Isabel sweetheart in every sentence. To her, we were two individuals, not two parts of a comparison. Every summer, she would take us to her old farm in Bend, Oregon. There, I could shed the label of Isabel's little sister and simply be Amanda, the girl who loved reading under the pecan tree, who quietly listened to her grandmother's stories of youth. When I was in my final year of college, she fell ill. It wasn't a violent illness, but a lingering one, as if time itself was trying to keep her with me a little longer. Before she passed, she called me to her bedside, held my hand, and said softly, "Amanda, I know you've endured things no one has acknowledged. I can't change the past, but I can do something small for your future." She told me she'd set aside a savings account in her will for both of us, for our weddings, split evenly, not to be touched by anyone else. She emphasized that she wanted her youngest granddaughter to have something truly her own, not shared, not taken. I cried, not because of the money, but because after all those years, someone finally acknowledged my pain was real. The money was placed in a joint trust under both our names, temporarily managed by our parents until we got married. I didn't think much of it. I knew I wasn't planning on a wedding anytime soon. Isabel was different. After meeting Evan, a tall lawyer with smooth talk and perfectly pressed shirts, she declared he was the one. 3 months later, they were engaged. A month after that, the whole family was swept up in wedding planning. I received a gold-trimmed invitation at my office with my name printed in a flowery font. Mrs. Amanda is cordially invited to the wedding of Isabel and Evan at Silver Oaks Estate, Napa Valley. Alongside it was a lengthy guest list, a gourmet European menu, and a photo album from their Santorini engagement shoot. I blinked. Where did they get the money for all this? I didn't want to be suspicious, but something didn't feel right. I called my mom and asked her directly. She hesitated for a second, then quickly slipped into her usual sweet tone. "Oh, I meant to tell you after the wedding so things wouldn't get complicated. Isabel needed your share of the wedding fund." "And you're not planning anything soon, right?" I froze at my desk. "What do you mean?" "Grandma made it very clear. That was mine." My mom laughed softly, as if I was being unreasonable. "Oh, Amanda, you don't need a fancy wedding. A girl like you getting married? I think that money should go to someone who really needs it. Your sister is starting a family after all." My heart pounded in heavy beats. "It's not about the money, it's about respect. It was Grandma's decision. It was the only thing in my life I knew was meant just for me." My dad chimed in from the other room, voice flat. "You have a career, money, a home. Isabel needs a new beginning, and well, you don't seem too interested in marriage. Don't blow this out of proportion." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt an emptiness spreading inside me like slow smoke. I hung up and stared blankly at my computer screen. The presentation I was working on suddenly meant nothing. It felt like a part of me had just been crushed by betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They had taken the one thing Grandma left me, a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle act of restoration, and decided it belonged to Isabel because she deserved it more. And once again, I was pushed aside, as if I had never truly been a part of this family. I had always stayed silent, always given in. But this time I knew things would never be the same again. I sat in my small apartment in Capitol Hill, Seattle, sunlight spilling across my desk and onto the computer screen. My inbox was open. The cursor blinked at the end of the message. Every word I had typed felt like a cut into my own memories. Not because it hurt, but because I was finally strong enough to stop. "I know about the wedding fund. I know you used my share to pay for Isabel's wedding without asking. This isn't just about money, it's about the lack of respect that's existed since I was a child and still continues today. I'm no longer trying to be seen or loved. Don't contact me unless it's to return what belongs to me, Amanda." I read it 3 times, not a single word extra, no apology. Then I hit send. After that, I opened my contacts and deleted one number at a time. Dad, Mom, Isabel. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Then I moved on to social media, blocking anyone who might become a bridge for excuses to find their way back to me. I no longer had the energy for phrases like, "They're still your parents," or "Come on, your sisters, don't make it a big deal." It was time I chose peace, not agreement, in pain. That night, I started something I once thought I didn't need: therapy. I found a therapist named Clara Monroe who specialized in working with adult women carrying childhood wounds. In our first session, I sat across from her in silence, for a long time before finally speaking. "I don't even know what I'm feeling. I'm so tired." Clara didn't interrupt. She just nodded and said one sentence that nearly made me cry. "We don't have to be strong for 29 years just to earn rest." Each session after that, I slowly unfolded memories I had carefully tucked away and buried deep. I began to look at my childhood with different eyes, clear, without blame toward myself. I no longer saw myself as too sensitive, like my mother used to say. I was just a child who hadn't been loved the way she deserved. A few months later, I found a small craftsman-style house in West Seattle. It had a backyard, olive green walls, and a porch just wide enough for afternoon reading on the weekends. When I signed the contract, I didn't call home to share the news. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I decorated the house in my own way, simple but warm. No family photos, instead pictures of me with my friends from work, the people I now consider my real family. There was Jillian, my best friend from college, who helped me move and brought homemade cookies. Luis, a coworker who could read me with just a glance, and Marianne, the older neighbor who always brought me orange marmalade when she saw I came home late. These people weren't related by blood, but they remembered my birthday, listened without comparing me to anyone, and never made me feel like I was second best. One autumn evening, I sat in the living room, wrapped in a charcoal gray blanket, holding a cup of hot mint tea. It was drizzling outside. I opened my laptop and wrote in my journal, a new habit since starting therapy. I'm living a life that needs no explanation. I'm not a copy of anyone. No longer a shadow. No longer a backup plan. I am Amanda. And just then, my phone lit up. Isabel was calling. I stared at the screen. Her name appeared with a glowing beach wedding photo as the profile picture. A part of me hesitated. But then, I took a deep breath and hit decline. After that, I went into the block settings and added her name. For good this time. I don't know if they'll ever feel remorse. I don't need to know. What I do know is, for the first time in my life, I stood up and chose myself. And no one can take that away from me now. 2 years have passed since the day I sent that final email to my parents. In that time, I've lived a life I once only dreamed of. Peaceful, purposeful, and no longer weighed down by invisible expectations. I was promoted to Director of Development at Nurix Labs the day I turned 30. The company's stock surged after a successful IPO, and I now had the financial means to begin expanding our engineering team internationally. It was all my achievement, owed to no one, dependent on no one. Then one September afternoon, during a strategy meeting with the executive team, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Uncle Alan, my mother's younger brother. We rarely spoke, so I had a sinking feeling something was wrong. I excused myself and answered. "Sweetheart, it's me." His voice was thick with emotion. "Your parents, they were in a car accident. A pickup ran a red light and hit them at the old church intersection. It's not looking good." I gripped the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "How are they now?" "Your dad's in critical condition. Internal bleeding. The doctors say he needs emergency surgery. Your mom has fractured ribs and a broken wrist. They still don't have health insurance, Amanda, and the bills are piling up." I don't remember what I said next, just that I couldn't focus on the rest of the meeting. That entire evening, I sat on the couch under the soft yellow light, my thoughts tangled like a knotted string. I'm not heartless. Despite the broken relationship, I still remembered the sound of my mother's laughter reading me fairy tales, and my father's rough but steady hands teaching me to ride a bike. But I also remembered the countless moments they abandoned me when they should have been there, and most recently, how they took what was rightfully mine without even asking. The next day, I got a message from Isabel. Long, formal, full of words like conscience, family, forgiveness. But it all led to one sweetened plea. "Amanda, I know I was wrong, but this time our parents really need you. Evan and we can't afford the hospital bills. This is your chance to prove you're the bigger person, the good daughter." I didn't reply. A day later, my mother called. Before I could decline the call, I heard her faint voice. "Amanda, I know I haven't always been right, but now, your father needs surgery. We don't have much time. You're the only one who can help." I closed my eyes. That voice once lulled me to sleep, but today it no longer brought warmth. Instead, it triggered a reel of memories, of being pushed aside again and again. And again, I set the phone down, turned on speaker, and said, softly but firmly, "I'm not this family's bank." Silence hung on the other end. Then my father's voice broke in. "We're family, Amanda. Family helps each other." I let out a short laugh, bitter, almost hollow. Then where was family when you used my inheritance for Isabel's wedding? When you missed my graduation because you were helping her pick out curtains? Where was family then? My mom started crying. But this time, I didn't waver. I'm not blaming you for the accident, but I'm also not obligated to pay for every mistake you've made. If you need help, ask the person who's been prioritized for 30 years. I ended the call. There was no anger, just a cold clarity. I knew I'd be judged. I knew relatives might turn on me. But I also knew I couldn't back down this time. That night, I made an anonymous donation to the hospital through a regional medical relief fund. Just enough so their treatment wouldn't be cut off, but with no trace linking it to me. I didn't do it because they deserved it. I did it so I wouldn't owe myself anything. That evening, I returned from a partner meeting in Bellevue. A light rain had started falling in Seattle, fog curling around the porch. I took off my coat and was just about to make myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. No warning, no message. I glanced at the doorbell camera screen. Isabel. Her blonde hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless like she'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot. In her hand was a Hermes Birkin bag, the kind that costs more than the car I drove in college. I didn't need to open the door to know why she was here. I opened the door, standing in the entryway, my voice calm but unwelcoming. "What are you doing here?" Isabel forced a tight smile, trying to appear casual. "We need to talk. Do you have a few minutes?" I stepped aside, not out of courtesy, but because I wanted to get this over with quickly. Isabel walked in, her eyes scanning my apartment, the one she once mocked as lifeless for lacking artwork or warm colors. "Your place? Still as cold as your personality, huh?" She gave a soft laugh, placing her bag on the armchair. I didn't respond. I simply sat across from her. "Go ahead. I'm not in the mood for more excuses." Isabel took a deep breath and began, voice steady. "Mom and Dad are really on the edge, Amanda. I know. We have a complicated past, but this isn't the time to hold grudges. They need surgery, physical therapy. You have the means. You could save them." I tilted my head, keeping my eyes fixed on hers. "What about you? Why aren't you helping?" She looked away briefly, then replied slowly. "James doesn't want to get involved. He just invested in a big project and, you know, you're financially independent, but I let out a soft, biting laugh. "You can't touch your husband's account, but you had no problem spending my money on your wedding." Isabel flushed, but tried to keep her composure. "That's in the past, Amanda." I stood up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward her. "You want to know if I could help? Here's what I'm holding. My account balances, company shares, investment returns. I could pay for all their medical expenses without blinking. But I won't." Isabel stared at the numbers on the screen, her face going pale. I closed the laptop, my voice lower. Not because I hate them, but because this is the result of decades of bad choices, made by them and by you. "I was just doing what Mom and Dad taught me," Isabel mumbled. "You've always tried to separate yourself from the family." I narrowed my eyes. "No, I just wanted to be seen as a person, not a shadow." Isabel stood, her voice starting to shake. "So, this is your revenge? Letting them lose everything?" I paused for a moment, then said, "It's not revenge. It's breaking out of a toxic cycle. They taught you that my existence was a mistake. Now they need me. But I'm not the backup plan anymore." She walked toward the door, clutching her luxury bag like it was the last shred of dignity she had left. Before stepping out, she turned and said softly, "You'll regret this when they're gone." I answered, calmer than ever. "What I regret is spending so many years trying to become someone they never wanted." The door closed behind her. I sat down and poured myself a glass of red wine I had aged since last month. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, I felt no turmoil, no anger, no regret. Less than a week after the tense encounter with Isabel, the family group chat suddenly came back to life after 2 years of silence. The instigator was Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister. Her first message was a long paragraph filled with exclamation points. Amanda, I can't believe you could be so cold. Your parents raised you, paid for your education, and now you turn your back on them over some past disagreement? Immediately, messages from other relatives poured in, like everyone was racing to judge me. Some called me ungrateful. Others said I was using success as an excuse to look down on family. Even a cousin I'd barely spoken 3 words to jumped in. No matter what happened, you don't abandon your parents in a crisis. Family is everything. I read each message, completely unmoved. Instead, I opened a folder I had prepared in advance. In it were scanned copies of Grandma's inheritance papers, clearly stating the wedding fund was to be split evenly between me and Isabel. I included bank statements showing the money was withdrawn just weeks before her wedding. I also attached a screenshot of a message Isabel had sent me. I know I used your share, but I promise I'll pay it back after the wedding. It's just not the right time, now. And finally, I included a financial breakdown. Not to brag, but to show that I could help. I simply chose not to, because I had been hurt for too long, and didn't want to continue the cycle. I sent it all to the group chat, with no explanation. No one said a word for 3 days. The once bussy chat fell silent like a room with the lights switched off. On the 4th evening, one person responded. Andrew, my uncle's oldest son, the only one in the family who went to the same university as me. He sent just one line. You really did it. Proud of you. I stared at the screen. A strange warmth crept in through the tension of the past days. Sometimes, one person understanding you is enough. After the group chat went quiet, I knew I had reached the end of the old chapter. I opened a real estate app and listed my Seattle apartment for sale. The place I once thought would be my first true home. But now, it was just a memory. I needed a fresh start, untainted by past wounds. 3 weeks later, the apartment sold for more than expected. With that money, plus steadily rising shares from the company, I accepted the offer to transfer to Nurex Labs' new branch in Austin, Texas. A vibrant, fast-growing city in the tech world, and more importantly, a place with no painful memories. The morning of my move, I stood in the empty apartment, autumn sunlight filtering through the curtains. I took one last look around, my hand brushing the arm of the chair where I'd spent nights writing development plans for my team. I didn't cry. I smiled. That afternoon, I boarded a direct flight to Austin. My suitcase wasn't heavy, just a few clothes, my laptop, and an old book from my grandmother I always kept with me. Everything else was new. New job, new apartment, and a life entirely of my own making. The apartment in Austin was a compact penthouse, but with a wide balcony overlooking Lady Bird Lake. That first night I played some soft jazz, poured a glass of white wine, and opened the windows to let the evening breeze in. I no longer heard my mother's voice in my head, no longer saw my father's critical gaze or Isabel's smug smile. Instead, I heard my own laughter, echoing in a space that belonged to no one else. I had chosen freedom, and this time I wasn't looking back. From a child seen as a shadow, I had stepped into my own light. I no longer sought approval from those who never truly loved me. Now, I live a life I chose. No permission needed, no strings attached. What I've been through didn't make me bitter. It made me strong, clear-eyed, and firm in knowing my worth. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're respected and uplifted. And I've finally found that place. Starting with myself. I'm sitting back against the chair, one hand holding a warm cup of tea, the other flipping through an old magazine I bought from the thrift shop on the corner. The early November air seeps through every crack of my tiny apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Outside the window, the leaden gray sky looks like it's trying to press snow onto the ground, but is strangely silent. The phone rings suddenly, breaking the delicate quiet. I glance at the screen. Dad! My breath catches for a second. I hit the speaker button, not allowing myself to hope for anything good. Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year, his voice says, light, as if he were talking about picking up more toilet paper. For a second, I think I misheard. I'm sorry, what? We just think it's better if you stayed put, he continues without pause, like he had rehearsed it in his head. To keep things peaceful. Mandy's been a bit on edge lately, you know? I set the teacup down on the table. The sound of ceramic hitting wood is sharp and dry. Mandy. Again. Mandy, my sister. The princess who never had to be responsible for anything. Anytime there's a problem, the whole family holds their breath just so she can feel comfortable. So, what you're saying is I'm not invited just because Mandy gets tense? I enunciate each word, trying to stay calm, though my throat feels tight. My dad sighs, that signature sigh of his that means don't make this a big deal. It's just one day, Emily. You'll be fine. I shoot up from the chair, the wood creaking underneath in protest. Just one day? I repeat, my voice now as cold as the frost on the porch. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 to the house since January, just to keep the furnace running through winter? Silence on the other end. Just the faint hum of the phone line, stretching out the distance between me and him. Don't bring money into this, he finally says, a little flustered. You offered to help. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoes in the empty room. Offered? In January when the heating bill spiked and you called at midnight saying the house was freezing, who paid it immediately? Me. In March when Mom cried because the furnace was clanking, who called the repairman? Me again. And in September when Mandy blew through most of her savings on her podcast plan, who paid for the fall heating oil? Still me. He doesn't argue, just goes back to the same tired line. Family is family, Emily. But this time, Mandy really needs calm. She's been through a lot. I stare out through the fogged-up window. Snow is beginning to fall, small flakes quietly covering the walkway. I've been through a lot too, but I was never given that kind of priority. He tries to keep his voice even, but I can hear the impatience creeping in. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. I take a deep breath, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then don't expect another dime from me this winter. If I'm not considered part of the family, don't treat me like an aita. I hang up before he can respond, the screen going black like my eyes right now. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Silent, freezing, but not quieter than the room I'm standing in. I sink onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, my thoughts tangled like the old cords in the kitchen drawer. That short phone call replays in my mind like a broken tape. They really did it. Excluded me from Thanksgiving, as casually as canceling a dentist appointment. I look up at the small photo on the shelf. Me and my parents at Thanksgiving in 2019. I had just started my first job at the shipping company. Low pay, long shifts, but I still caught a bus home just to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken, and listen to Dad rant about his team losing. That warmth now feels like an old, dusty memory. I get up, walk to the desk, and open my laptop. Wind howls outside, slipping through the old window frame, sharp and bitter. I open the utility payment account, the one I set up for them last winter after Mom sobbed on the phone, saying it was too cold and they couldn't afford heating oil. I was the one who called the oil company every month. I was the one who paid every bill, every dollar. Over $2,400 last year and $4,800 this year, just for heating. I did it not because anyone asked, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I used to believe helping family through hard times came without conditions, until I became the extra piece. I pull up the Excel file where I quietly logged every transfer. The last entry reads, 10 months ago, $400. Sent ahead of the cold so they wouldn't worry. I wonder, do they even remember? I watched Mandy, my sister, burn through nearly $16,000 of my parents' savings in 4 months. Her artisanal candle business sounded artsy, until she ordered over 1,000 candles from a mass production plant in Texas, slapped on a handmade label, and thought she could sell them at triple the price. No one bought them, the inventory piled up in the garage, and my parents, instead of scolding or holding her accountable, just shook their heads and said, "She's young. Everyone makes mistakes." I didn't say a word, just quietly sent more money to help them through winter. Meanwhile, Mandy kept posting pictures on Instagram. $7 lattes at vintage cafes, brunches with friends in the latest Zara coat. Every time I scrolled past one, my hand would drift to my back, still sore from a 10-hour loading shift. I almost texted to ask why, but then I thought, maybe it's something I'll never truly understand or accept. I returned to the screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel service button. Just one click and the system will stop automatic payments starting next month. I sit quietly for a long while, not because I'm unsure, but because I'm letting myself remember what it felt like to matter to them. And then I click. A notification pops up. Service will end on November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. I close the laptop and walk to the window. Snow is falling now, each flake as weightless as my father's words on the phone. Except snow, when it falls long enough, can freeze a whole house. They'll notice, but not right away. Mandy will keep believing the world revolves around her. Mom will try to ignore it until her fingers go numb while making dinner. And Dad? He'll get angry, like always. But he won't be able to deny that he's the one who told me to stay put. Part of me feels hollow, like I just let go of something important. But another part, the one that woke up the third time I had to choose between buying a new coat or sending money home, feels lighter. For the first time in a long time, I'm standing up for myself. And I know this winter will be long, but at least I'm no longer the one shivering because of someone else's decision. I started waking up earlier, not because my job changed, but because sleep hasn't felt peaceful since that call. In the days after canceling my parents' heating service, I carried a constant tension, like walking a tightrope. Part relief, part doubt. But every morning, when I get out of bed and my feet touch the cold floor of this small but peaceful apartment, I remember why I did it. On November 2nd, the system officially sent confirmation. The heating oil service for the house at 422 Elm Street had been canceled. I read that message while sipping coffee in the kitchen, the little space heater humming steadily by my feet. A quiet kind of comfort I'd bought for myself, piece by piece, through every extra shift. That day, the snow fell unusually thick. Minneapolis was already cold, but this year winter seemed to arrive a few weeks early. I thought about my parents' 2-story house, the house I grew up in, with its old shingles and thin glass windows, where the cold could creep in after just one night without heat. I didn't feel happy picturing them bundled up in winter coats, but I didn't feel guilty either. It was time they understood that kindness isn't an obligation, especially when it's treated like a given. 4 days later, the first message came from Mom. "Emily, the heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I stared at the message, then set my phone down. I didn't reply. That evening, I got a text from Mandy, just one line. So childish. No greeting, no question, just judgment, as always. She probably thought I'd react, scramble to explain, or maybe even apologize. But I simply switched my phone to silent. On the 7th day, Dad called. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. 3 minutes later, a voicemail popped up. "Emily, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me." His voice was hoarse and sharp, a mix of anger and concern. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I went to the bookstore on Lake Street, bought a new novel, and sat for hours at the cafe next door, where the heater roared and the smell of warm cinnamon waffles filled the air. I let myself enjoy something I had always postponed. Time for myself. On the 10th day, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the heating oil provider. Hi, is this Miss Emily? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard back from the homeowners, and the previous contract was under your name. I answered clearly, no, the contract was canceled and will not be renewed. I'm no longer responsible for that house. I see, the rip said, hesitating slightly. So, just to confirm, you're not intending to continue payments? I looked out the window, where slow snowflakes blanketed the street. That's correct. On November 14th, the messages started coming in rapid succession. Mom, Emily, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat and Mandy's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Mandy, this time more bitter. Fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. I read each message. Didn't delete them. Didn't reply. I just saved them. As a record for myself of where I once poured out everything. And what I got in return. On the 16th day, Minneapolis was hit by the first snowstorm of the season. News alerts advised everyone to stay indoors. Some areas temporarily lost power. I sat by the window, wrapped in a thick blanket, hands curled around a mug of hot cocoa, the heater humming steadily beside me. Outside, the wind howled through every corner of the city. Part of me wondered, were they huddled together in the living room, wrapped in every blanket they owned? Were they thinking of me? Not as a money transfer, but as a person? The one who had quietly kept that house warm for the past 2 winters? Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. I set my phone aside, pulled the armchair closer to the heater, and opened the first page of my new novel. My eyes paused at the opening line. You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind. And I smiled. Since the heating was cut, the messages from my family increased with each drop on the thermometer. I didn't need to check my phone to guess their contents. They all carried the same tone: urgency, blame, sometimes desperation. On November 17th, the first text came from Mom. Emily, it's 54 DEF in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and refuses to take medicine. Can you help call someone? I read the message, then placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. On the stove, a pot of potato and celery soup bubbled, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen. I stirred steadily, the heat fogging up the window panes. That afternoon, the outside temperature dropped to 25 DGF. The snowstorm arrived earlier than expected, wind gusting against the rooftops, but inside my little apartment, everything was warm and quiet. I wrapped myself in my favorite sweater, turned on the oven for extra warmth, and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else, I knew they were pulling out every thin blanket in the house, layering clothes, and turning up a thermostat no longer connected to anything. On November 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't pick up a single one. A message followed, short and commanding. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I gave a dry laugh. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, the one behind the scenes, the one who handled things. They forgot that even kindness has its limits. That same day, Mandy posted a story on social media, a picture of her feet in thick socks with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I just scrolled past. I didn't feel pity. I didn't find it funny. I just thought it was accurate. They were living in a freezer they had shut themselves into the moment they called and told me to stay back for Mandy's peace. On November 21st, Mom called again, voice choked. Emily, it's down to 40 DGF in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so numb I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something? I was prepping grilled cheese for dinner. The oven glowed orange and the scent of golden, sizzling butter filled the room. I didn't answer. That evening, I ate in silence, the occasional buzz of messages breaking through the crunch of each bite. Each time my phone vibrated, I glanced briefly, a habit I'd formed over the past week, then went back to enjoying my meal. I wasn't glad they were suffering, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply living within the boundaries I had drawn after years of being seen as the financial backup, with no need for consent. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad made me pause mid-splice while chopping onions. Emily, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it. I set the knife down and looked out the window. Outside, snow blanketed the porch and the neighbors' cars. I closed my eyes, picturing the old house, where I learned to ride a bike, where I wrapped my first Christmas gift, now sitting cold and silent. But in that vision, I no longer saw myself in the frame. I poured more hot water into the teapot. As the steam rose, I thought about Mandy, who once told me I was useless for refusing to fund her local fashion magazine idea last year. About Dad, who said I needed to stop being so sensitive when I brought up always being excluded from family meetings. About Mom, who stayed silent every time I was dismissed just to keep the peace. I had been silent long enough. That night, I curled up on the sofa, a book in hand, covered with the light fleece blanket I bought last year. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, but it was enough. Warm and peaceful. My phone kept ringing. I still didn't answer. Because sometimes, the only way for others to recognize your worth is to disappear from the place they always assumed you'd be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise, the pale light slipping through thin white curtains. Outside, snow had blanketed the steps, and the city was eerily quiet. No cars, no voices, just the wind whispering over rooftops. A gentle reminder that winter had claimed every corner. I turned on the coffee maker and made myself a simple breakfast: crispy toast, peanut butter, and a juicy orange. I didn't prepare turkey. I didn't make the mashed potatoes Mom used to cook. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old kitchen where the three of us used to squeeze in on holidays. This year, I chose simplicity. Not from lack, but because I no longer needed to pretend things were the same. At 10 a.m., I was on the sofa, blanket draped over me, holding a hot cup of coffee, feet stretched to the edge of the table. A documentary I loved was playing on the TV. Everything felt so peaceful. I almost forgot the emotional storm of the past few weeks. Then the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. I knew who it was before I even stepped into the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see the familiar figure. A thick gray coat, cheeks flushed from cold and frustration, eyes still holding that look I'd known since childhood. Not apology, but expectation. I cracked the door slightly, warm air spilling out, hitting my father's gaunt face. "Emily," he said, his breath forming pale clouds. "We need to talk." I leaned against the door frame, hand still on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." "You cut the heat," he said flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. She's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I kept my gaze steady on his. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't notify us." "Because it was never in your name to begin with," I said. "I handled everything. For 2 years, over $8,000, and then, with one call, I was cut out of dinner to avoid upsetting Mandy. So now, maybe you should handle the rest." He flinched like he hadn't expected me to remember every number. But I remembered. Every bill, every skipped meal so I could send money. Every morning I waited at the bus stop in the snow just to make my shift on time. "Emily, don't make this more complicated than it is," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Mandy's been through a lot." I sighed. "Dad, Mandy's been through a lot because she puts herself there. I'm the one who gets pushed out. I stayed quiet when she blew all her savings on a creative academy she dropped after 2 months. I stayed quiet when she borrowed money and disappeared. But when I got excluded from a family meal because of her fragility, that was it. No more. He stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then he shook his head slightly, voice lower now. We have no money, Emily. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom has a fever. We can't take it much longer. I could feel the cold seeping through the cracked door, but I didn't move. You told me I should stay back, to keep the peace for Mandy. I did exactly that. I stayed back. As for peace, I don't know about you, but I've found mine. He gripped the edge of his hood, eyes narrowing. You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said in frustration? I opened the door a little wider, letting him see the warm apartment behind me. The kitchen glowing, the neatly set table, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. It's not punishment, I said softly. It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching through the snow. I closed the door, the sound of the lock clicking into place, clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trembling anymore. The week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Haley, my cousin who lives in southern Minnesota, one of the few relatives who still kept in touch with me despite not being close to Mandy. Her voice came through the speaker, loud and clear, mixed with the sound of wind howling against her window. I just talked to Aunt Claire, Haley began, straight to the point. Things at your house are worse than I thought. I sat down at the dining table, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea, my eyes following the fog rising on the window pane. Mandy's moved out, Haley continued. Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She crashed at her best friend's place, but they only let her stay for a few days. Now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie. I wasn't surprised. Mandy always had a way of making everything orbit around her, until no one was left to spin. The affection she'd relied on all her life had finally scattered with the cold wind. What about my parents? I asked, my voice calm. Aunt's staying in a roadside motel near Highway 52. Real cheap, the kind people rent by the week with walls thin as paper. I heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia. And your dad? Haley hesitated, then sighed. He sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for some temporary heating oil. But it'll only last a few days. I gently tightened my grip around the teacup. That watch collection was the only thing my grandfather had left behind, once displayed like a treasure in the glass cabinet in the living room. Now, it was being listed online, like items no one even cared to bargain for. You okay, Emily? Haley asked softly, sensing my long silence. I'm okay, I replied. Just a little sad about how it all ended. I'm not, Haley said, her voice firmer. I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something, that's not family. That's using you. We chatted a little more before hanging up. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark, reflecting my face in the kitchen light. Not happy, not angry. Just the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped. Not because they were tired, but because they had gone far enough to realize they owed no one anything anymore. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my regular rhythm. Early mornings with coffee, work shifts at the distribution center from 7 to 3, afternoon stops at the local market for fresh produce and new pastries. Evenings spent reading, listening to old jazz records, and occasionally calling Haley to hear stories from outside the family circle. Other than that, I heard nothing from Mandy, Dad, or Mom. The messages had stopped after Dad came to my door. The old house on Ashwood Street was now listed for sale on a local real estate site. Haley said they couldn't afford to keep it, not even with winter just beginning. Sometimes I dreamed of walking back into that old kitchen, the one where Mom used to bake pumpkin pies, where I did my homework in high school, where Dad laid out the morning paper on the table every day. But in the dream, the kitchen was cold, dim, and no one was there. I just stood quietly, looked around, and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry with them. Truly, I wasn't. But I didn't feel sorry anymore either. Maybe because, in the end, I had been cold and alone too. Except I had learned to stand up and build a fire for myself. One night in early December, Haley called again. Her voice rang out between laughter and exasperation. Emily, you won't believe this. Mandy's on the internet telling some sob story about being abandoned by family like you're the cruelest person alive. I raised an eyebrow. She did what? Posted a video, crying, saying you left your family during a crisis, but not a single word about all the money you paid or how they cut you out of Thanksgiving? I chuckled, a small smile, without bitterness. Let her talk, I said. People will believe what they want. I don't have to prove anything anymore. Haley laughed loudly. I love this version of you. Solid, unshakable. You're honestly inspiring. After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window and watched the snow fall slowly under the warm glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh. But I had learned how to keep myself warm. From simple things, from clear boundaries, and from knowing that sometimes, to live in peace, you have to walk away and never look back. That afternoon, the snow was thick and fluffy, covering the small balcony where I kept a dried lavender pot. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. No one went outside unless absolutely necessary. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock, steady, hesitant. That made me pause. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Mom. She stood there, bundled in a puffy coat that nearly swallowed her face, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, snow piled on her shoulders and hat. She clutched an old handbag, her shoes buried deep in the snow, looking both weathered and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a few seconds before cracking the door open, leaving a narrow gap between us. Emily? My mother said softly, her voice trembling, whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my distance. Why are you here, in this weather? I took the bus, she said, inhaling before coughing lightly. Then walked the rest of the way. Took nearly an hour, but I thought maybe you'd hear me out this time. I didn't say anything, just waited in silence. I've been thinking a lot. About Thanksgiving. About all the winters before. She tightened her grip on the bag, her eyes on the tiled doorstep where the snow had started to melt into water. And I realized I was wrong. Not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I let you carry everything and treated it like it was expected. I tilted my head slightly. For the first time in years, I saw my mother without the mask of strength. No justifications, no polished reasoning. Just a woman trying to find her way back from the path she'd chosen. Mandy regrets it too, she went on. She says things never should have gotten this far. She says, you don't owe anyone anything. I let out a dry laugh. Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone. Only after I stopped paying, only after everything fell apart, do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating? That's not it, she shook her head, her voice catching. I just want you to know. I understand now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner. I looked at her for a long moment. Those apologies, had they come years ago, might have softened me. But now, the wounds no longer bled, they had become scars. And scars don't feel... You chose Mandy, I said slowly, every word as sharp and cold as the wind. When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Mandy was stressed. When the house was in trouble, I paid the bills, but Mandy was the one being comforted. When I started living for myself, you called it punishment. So what now? You're here to ask me to carry it all again? She looked up, eyes full of tears. No, I'm not asking you to come back for anything. I just want you to know you matter. And even if you never forgive me, I accept that." I didn't respond right away. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel the warmth behind me. From the apartment I'd kept lit, heated, and peaceful on my own. A stark contrast to where she had come from. "I'm not angry anymore," I said honestly. "But I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bolt holding the family together. I've stopped doing that, and I'm not going back." She tightened her grip on her bag, then nodded. "I understand." I didn't close the door right away. We stood there a few seconds more, saying nothing, letting the wind blow between the silence. Then she stepped back and turned away. I watched her walk off, her figure shrinking in the snow. When I closed the door, I didn't feel the lightness I thought I would, but there was no regret either, just a warm certainty, like the glow of the lamp in my apartment, that I had made the right choice. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket over myself, and resumed the old jazz track I'd paused. And as the saxophone played, I knew, for the first time in years, I no longer needed permission to live my own life. January passed in a soft, white hush of snowfall. The city lay frozen in bitter cold, and I continued living at the quiet pace I'd chosen. My apartment stayed warm, thanks to the small heater by the window, and the moments I spent reheating soup, toasting bread, or knitting scarves on lazy weekends. There were no more messages from Mom. The last time she came was right after Thanksgiving, and since then, I hadn't heard a word. No blame, no begging, not even the usual New Year greetings she used to send, those generic ones with a picture. I didn't feel sad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. That silence wasn't scary. It was like fresh air after a storm that had lasted for years. Haley still gave me updates each week, as if she were the only remaining bridge between me and the rest of the family. I saw Mandy post asking for help on a community forum. Haley said during our most recent call. She said she lost her job, looking for temporary housing, included something about cracks in family relationships. Same old deflecting. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The aroma of sautéed onions filled the room, overpowering the story being told. "Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car," Haley added. "That old SUV's still running fine. I heard he wants the money to pay off some overdue bills. Aunt Claire moved in with a relative in Des Moines. She said she needs time to rethink how she raised her kids." Haley chuckled bitterly on the other end. "A little late." "Yeah," I replied calmly. "But maybe better than never realizing it all." As time passed, things I once struggled to see became clearer. Not everyone changes, and not everyone is worth hoping they will. Some things, once broken, are better left where they fell. Like cracks on winter ice, best not stepped on, not patched. I no longer thought about Mandy every night, no longer checked social media to see who was saying what. And I certainly no longer felt the need to explain to the world what I did right or wrong. I just lived. Truly. Every morning I woke up in this cozy apartment reminded me that I was standing on ground I chose for myself, not on a shaky foundation built from someone else's expectations. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore down the block. The shop owner recognized me instantly. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said cheerfully. "Braving the cold, huh?" I smiled and picked out a novel about women who left their families to start over. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, boiled water for tea, and sat by the fireplace. The fire glowed bright, orange light flickering against the exposed brick wall. I pulled the wool blanket higher and stared into the flames. Steady, quiet, persistent. Just like me. Somewhere out there, the old house was probably still cold. Maybe they were borrowing space heaters from neighbors. Maybe Mandy was filling out aid applications. Maybe my mother still curled up every night in 3 blankets, thinking about those dinners when we were all together, and the people who no longer wanted to sit at that table. As for me, I no longer belonged to that back then. The fire crackled in agreement. I reached for my tea, steam blurring my vision. though my heart had never been clearer. Winter would last, snow would fall, but this time, I wouldn't be the one shivering. I had chosen peace, and I didn't regret it. From my story, I've learned that not all blood ties are worth preserving at all costs. Some boundaries, once crossed too many times, must be redrawn with finality. I once believed sacrifice meant love, but in truth, unconditional sacrifice only teaches others to devalue your worth. Now I no longer seek validation from my family. I live for myself, and that is the freest thing I've ever done. What do you think about Emily's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it what she needed to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional family stories to come.